What if I told you the most powerful word in diplomatic history, from Sun Tzu to Kennedy, was no? This is the definitive guide on reverse psychology in historical negotiations. From ancient empires to modern standoffs, world leaders have used deception, manipulation, and reverse tactics to rewrite the map. In many cases, the side that appeared to be losing was actually the side that had already won. This is the story of how saying one thing and meaning another became the most dangerous weapon in diplomatic history. Not bullets, not bombs, words, silences, bluffs, and the terrifying willingness to walk away from the table. Let's start where all of this begins, 2,500 years ago in ancient China. Around 500 BC, a military strategist named Sun Tzu wrote a slim volume called The Art of War. Buried in its opening chapter sits a sentence that would echo through every negotiation, every treaty, and every backroom deal for the next 2.5 millennia. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu wasn't just talking about armies on a battlefield. He was describing something far more universal, the idea that perception becomes the real battleground. When able to attack, one must seem unable. When active, seem inactive. When near, make the enemy think you are far away. This is reverse psychology in its purest, most ancient form. You project the opposite of your intention, and in doing so, you control how your opponent reacts. Sun Tzu's most radical insight was this: to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill, not the ability to win 100 battles, but the ability to make the battle unnecessary, to maneuver your opponent into a position where they defeat themselves. Ren Li, the editor of lectures on Sun Tzu's Art of War, argues that this concept of warfare as a way of deception shocks readers because it rejects brute force in favor of something far more subtle: asymmetry, misdirection, psychological control. If Sun Tzu planted the seed, then Niccolo Machiavelli watered it with something darker. In 1513, the Florentine diplomat sat down and wrote The Prince, a handbook for rulers that became the most controversial political text in Western history. In chapter 18, Machiavelli states plainly, "A wise ruler cannot and should not keep his word when doing so is to his disadvantage. Princes," he argued, "are obligated to lie in certain circumstances, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The survival of the state demanded it." But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Some scholars believe that The Prince itself was a masterful act of reverse psychology. The argument goes like this: Machiavelli was a committed Republican who believed in the Florentine Republic, so why would he write a manual for a tyrant? The theory suggests that Machiavelli deliberately gave Lorenzo de' Medici advice that would jeopardize his power, hasten his overthrow, and allow the Republic to return. If that's true, then The Prince isn't just a book about deception. It is deception. The text practices exactly what it preaches, and we're still debating it 500 years later. Between Machiavelli's Renaissance intrigue and the modern era, another master of diplomatic chess emerged in 19th century Europe. Prince Metternich, architect of the Congress of Vienna in 1814, understood that the most durable peace required giving even defeated enemies a stake in the new order. This principle of diplomatic face-saving would echo through every major negotiation that followed. Now let's jump forward to the 19th century, and a man who turned reverse psychology into the architecture of a nation. In the summer of 1862, Otto von Bismarck was appointed Minister-President of Prussia. His highest previous rank had been ambassador to Russia. He had never held an administrative position. Yet this novice solved a riddle that had stumped European diplomacy for 2 generations: how to unify Germany. Bismarck was a walking paradox. He never appeared in public without a military uniform, yet he had never really served in the military. The generals viewed him with suspicion for what they considered his excessive moderation. The man who declared a policy of blood and iron wrote prose of extraordinary clarity and restraint. And this embodiment of realpolitik, this cold-eyed pragmatist, actually turned power into an instrument of self-restraint through the sheer agility of his diplomacy. What Bismarck understood, better than almost anyone before or since, was that limited wars with limited aims could achieve unlimited political goals. He managed to prevent uncontrolled escalation by ensuring that military strategy always served diplomatic objectives. He kept other European powers out of his conflicts through a combination of reassurance and implied threat. He appeared reckless while being meticulously careful. That's reverse psychology applied at the level of civilizations. Then came the 20th century, when the stakes became existential. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was supposed to end the war to end all wars. Instead, it became a case study in what happens when negotiation becomes humiliation. Germany was held responsible for starting the entire conflict. It lost 13% of its territory, including 10% of its population. Reparations were so imprecise that the final sum wasn't even fixed until 1921, when a committee set it at £6,600,000,000. Here's the critical detail. Germany was not allowed to participate in the negotiations before signing. There was no reverse psychology here, no golden bridge, no face-saving mechanism. Just raw punishment disguised as diplomacy. The psychological scars of that treaty would fester for 2 decades before erupting into something far worse. Versailles stands as the negative example, the cautionary tale of what happens when you don't give your opponent a way to save face. Fast forward to 1956. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a death spiral of mutual distrust that would last from 1947 to 1991. A new term enters the political vocabulary: brinkmanship. The word was coined by Adlai Stevenson and popularized by Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, who believed something counterintuitive, that being willing to go to the brink of war would actually prevent war. The theoretical framework came from Thomas Schelling, the Nobel Prize-winning game theorist, who described brinkmanship as the threat that leaves something to chance. You don't promise destruction. You promise that things might spiral out of control. That uncertainty, that ambiguity, becomes the weapon itself. Cold War brinkmanship was psychological warfare on a global scale. Both superpowers understood mutual assured destruction, the deterrence theory that made nuclear war theoretically unwinnable. Both knew that a nuclear war had no winner. So the game became about perception. Who could appear more willing to cross the line? Who could seem more irrational, more dangerous, more unpredictable? That game reached its absolute peak in October of 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 days that brought humanity closer to annihilation than at any other point in history. Kennedy himself calculated the odds of nuclear catastrophe at 1 in 3, maybe higher. More than 100,000 American troops were sent to Florida for a possible invasion of Cuba. The Navy dispatched 180 vessels into the Caribbean. 40,000 Marines prepared for an amphibious assault. What most of those troops and their commanders didn't know was that there were more than 40,000 Soviet soldiers already on the island, along with approximately 100 tactical nuclear weapons. Kennedy's executive committee, ExComm, overwhelmingly favored a military strike. The generals wanted war, the advisors wanted war. The momentum of the crisis was pushing toward war. Kennedy did something that looked, to many around him, like weakness. He chose a naval blockade instead. He chose negotiation. Then he did something even more remarkable. He gave Khrushchev a way out. This is what negotiation expert Bill Urey calls building a golden bridge in his seminal work, Getting to Yes. You don't back your opponent into a corner. You construct a path that allows them to retreat with their dignity intact. Kennedy publicly promised not to invade Cuba, and secretly, known to only 9 American officials at the time, he agreed to remove U.S. nuclear missiles from Turkey. That secret deal wasn't officially acknowledged until a conference in Moscow in January of 1989, 27 years of silence about one of the most important agreements in human history. But there was another layer of reverse psychology at work. On October 27th, Bobby Kennedy delivered a message to Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. He told him that the president was under enormous pressure from the military. An irreversible chain of events could occur against his will. That the military might even overthrow the president and seize power. Think about that. The president's own brother was telling the Soviets that the American government might lose control of its own military. It was a masterful piece of reverse signaling. "We want peace, but we might not be able to guarantee it." The implication was clear. Deal with us now, while you still can. Secretary of State Dean Rusk would later say, "We went eyeball to eyeball with the Russians, and the other guy blinked." But the truth is more nuanced than that. Both sides blinked. Both sides made concessions. The world survived because two leaders understood that winning meant letting your opponent believe they hadn't entirely lost. Within a year, Kennedy and Khrushchev signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the first disarmament agreement of the nuclear age. As Sergei Khrushchev, the premier's son, would later reflect, "The greatest lesson is that you have to negotiate with your enemy. If you negotiate with your enemy, there's a good chance that you'll come to some conclusion that will satisfy both sides." Then there was the man who took the lessons of the missile crisis and twisted them into something more deliberate, more calculated, and arguably more dangerous. Richard Nixon's Madman theory. Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, revealed it years later. Nixon had told him directly, "I call it the Madman theory, Bob. I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached the point where I might do anything to stop the war." The plan was to slip the word that Nixon was obsessed, uncontrollable, that he had his hand on the nuclear button and no one could restrain him. Nixon believed that Ho Chi Minh himself would be in Paris in 2 days begging for peace. The theory had roots in Cold War brinkmanship and even deeper roots in Machiavelli, who argued in 1517 that it's a very wise thing to simulate madness. Nixon's version was operationalized in the fall of 1969. B-52 bombers loaded with nuclear weapons circled the Arctic. Aircraft carriers deployed to the Pacific. The military staged a feint that pantomimed mining the major North Vietnamese port of Haiphong. In October 1969, U.S. nuclear forces secretly went on full alert, a fact that remained classified for years. The results were mixed at best. The North Vietnamese did not yield. Henry Kissinger delivered an explicit warning. If major progress wasn't made by November 1, 1969, the president would be compelled, with great reluctance, to take measures of the greatest consequences. Nothing happened. Hanoi didn't flinch. But the theory did have an effect in Moscow. The Soviet foreign minister reportedly worried that Nixon put forces on alert so often that it's hard to know what it meant. That uncertainty, that inability to read the signal clearly, was itself a form of psychological pressure. Political scientist Scott Sagan and historian Jeremy Suri have since criticized the Madman theory as ineffective and dangerous, noting that Soviet leader Brezhnev may not have understood what Nixon was trying to communicate at all. Ironically, it was the American anti-war movement that ultimately constrained Nixon's escalation, forcing him to abandon plans for a wider conflict. The madman was stopped not by his enemies abroad, but by his own citizens at home. Now consider Reagan. In March 1983, Ronald Reagan stood before a convention of evangelical Christians and called the Soviet Union an evil empire. It was a rhetorical bomb. But Reagan's strategy was more layered than it appeared. There were 3 components. First, label the Soviet system as evil and a failure. Second, pursue a massive arms buildup that would leave the Soviets no choice but to negotiate. Third, publicly defend liberal democracy as the inevitable victor of history. It looked like pure aggression. But Reagan's advisor on Soviet affairs, Jack Matlock, later revealed they were actually pursuing a strategy of offering the Soviet Union what they could see was in their interest. They weren't trying to bully Moscow. They were trying to create conditions where cooperation became the rational choice. The public hardline and the private flexibility. Dual messaging, the most sophisticated form of reverse psychology in historical negotiations. By November 1985, Reagan sat across from Mikhail Gorbachev at the Geneva Summit. By 1987, they signed the INF Treaty, eliminating an entire class of nuclear weapons. And by May 1988, when Reagan visited Moscow and a reporter asked if he still thought the Soviet Union was an evil empire, he smiled and said no. That was another time, another era. The Camp David Accords of September 1978 offer yet another dimension. Over 12 extraordinary days, Jimmy Carter mediated between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Rarely had a U.S. president devoted as much sustained personal attention to a single foreign policy issue. The result was historic. Egypt became the first Arab state to recognize Israel. Carter achieved it not through threats or deception, but through relentless, patient, face-to-face engagement, proving that sometimes the most powerful reverse psychology is simply refusing to accept that a deal is impossible. These tactics haven't disappeared. They've evolved. During the Chorus Free Trade Agreement renegotiations, Trump reportedly told his trade negotiators to warn South Korean diplomats that if they don't give the concessions now, this crazy guy will pull out of the deal. The Madman theory, recycled for the 21st century. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, analysts speculated that Putin's decision to place nuclear forces on special alert was a deliberate invocation of the same playbook, swinging wildly between openness to negotiations and full-scale military assault. Paul Fisher, director of the Oxford Program on Negotiation, has noted that relations between the United States and Russia today are just as fractious as they were 61 years ago during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Historian Max Hastings puts it more bluntly, "The scope for a catastrophic miscalculation is as great now as it was in 1914, Europe, or in the 1962 Caribbean." Then he adds the chilling postscript. In 1962, the world got lucky. So what does all of this tell us? From Sun Tzu to the Situation Room, reverse psychology in historical negotiations has followed a remarkably consistent pattern. Project strength when you're weak. Project madness when you're rational. Push to the edge, but always leave your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. The leaders who understood this, Kennedy, Bismarck, Reagan in his later years, they reshaped the world. The ones who forgot it, the architects of Versailles, Nixon in Vietnam, they created disasters that echoed for generations. The most dangerous negotiation is the one where someone believes their own bluff. The most successful negotiation is the one where both sides walk away believing they won. That's not just diplomacy. That's the deepest form of human psychology, weaponized, refined, and deployed at the highest possible stakes. And it's still happening right now.